I have a question about Islam. I ran into a guy on Umingo yesterday who was basically proselytizing his religion, and the core belief of his religion is that the Quran is perfect, but the Hadiths are illegitimate and they're the source of all the bad things in Islam. Basically, by making bad faith interpretations of verses in the Quran. So, for example, I brought up the verses about the woman that your right hand possesses and about hitting your wife. And he told me that those don't refer to slaves and that it refers to metaphorical hitting, like when you say hit the hay. He also told me that he loves Israel and attacked Islam over endorsement of fucking 9-year-old girls, although he didn't really disavow the focus on afterlife. So my question, Armin, is: do you think that anything along these lines could be a candidate to reform Islam to not be terrible if it uses Islam as a perfect model of what not to do, or is it a total deal breaker that the underlying text says what it says?
So first of all, this will have very little buy-in within the Islamic community, okay? Because if you get rid of the hadith, you're basically getting rid of 90% of Islamic teachings, right? So you wouldn't know how to you know that you're supposed to pray, but you don't know how to pray. You don't know how to do the Hajj, you don't know how to do fasting. You wouldn't know eh, 4 out of the 5 pillars of Islam, you wouldn't know technically how to do it if you get rid of the hadith. And there's so many teachings within Islam that will go away, and some of the worst parts will stay because here's the so first of all, these people are called Quranists, right? And Muslims have a good argument against them because the Quran clearly says that you're supposed to use Muhammad as a role model. The Quran clearly says that. Okay, Muhammad is the role model, and you have to emulate him, right? And here's the problem: the Quran doesn't tell you anything about how Muhammad lived. So the Quran tells you about the fact about that you have to follow him and emulate him and do what he did and basically listen to what he's saying, and it doesn't tell you what he said. It doesn't tell you what he did. So how am I supposed to do that, right? So any Muslims would be like, okay, obviously the hadith is necessary because why would the Quran tell us to do something that is impossible, right? Like how am I supposed to do what Muhammad did and say without the hadith, right? Also, the Quran also said that the Muslim community will never agree upon a falsehood. That's what the Quran says, right? So the Muslims get that understanding so that if the Muslim community comes with the understanding that this is the authentic hadith, according to Quran, that's correct, right? Also, like for example, and there's so many verses within the Quran that is very clear of how barbaric and evil they are, right? And the Quran itself makes it very clear. It's either very clear or it's retarded, like it doesn't know how to communicate with people. But it makes it very clear that you could have sex with children, like the Quran makes that clear, right? And if it means something else, then it doesn't know how to come. Then it could mean anything, right? The Quran makes it very clear that not that you could hit your wife, that you should hit your wife. Like it's a command, it's not a suggestion in certain situations, right? And if you say it means something else, then if it means anything other than that, then it could mean anything, right? Because it, for example, tells you that if you fear disobedience from your wife, for example, the Quran says that. It doesn't say if she's disobedient. It says if you fear disobedience, right? Then first give her the silence treatment. If it doesn't work, then kick her out of the bed. Don't let her sleep with you. And if that doesn't work, and you still fear disobedience from her, then hit her, right? So it says that is azrabahunna, right? And some people say, well, how do you know it means hitting? Azrabahunna zaraba means hitting. They say in some other parts of the Quran, azrabahunna has been used to say moving towards something, right? But first of all, it doesn't make sense in that context. First, give her the silence treatment, then kick her out of bed, and then move towards her. It doesn't make any sense, right? Also, the way that it's used in Arabic, any Arab speaker would tell you, no, it doesn't mean that, right? So, for example, strike in English could mean hitting, but if it's talking about baseball, for example, you know within the context that it's talking about baseball. Like for example, if I say hit the road, okay, you know in English that okay, that's not about hitting somebody. Within that context, it's obvious. Hit the road is not about physically hitting somebody, right? So the way that Azrabahunna is used in Arabic in that context, no Arab speaker would think that this means anything other than hitting. So it would be as if somebody says, "Oh, your wife is disobedient. Well, hit her." Somebody said it would be as if somebody comes and says to somebody who doesn't speak English, "No, this means hit the road. Hit the road. It's not about hitting somebody." Any English speakers knows that if you say hit your wife if she's not listening to you, that is talking about physical violence. But if somebody comes and tells a non-English speaker, well, hitting in English is often used in different ways. For example, hitting the road doesn't mean about physical violence. An English speaker would like, no, you retard. In this context, it specifically means physical violence. It couldn't mean anything else. So that is what these Quranists are trying to do, to make something that is clear to Arab-speaking person that is about hitting somebody, because in some ways in Arabic, azrabahunna is used in a different way, same as hitting the road might mean something, trying to fool them to think that this means something else here. But it obviously, and here's the thing, the Quran is meant to be God's way of communicating with humans. God is all knowing, all benevolent, all of that, all knowing, all loving, and all powerful. And the Quran is supposed to be the most perfect communication method between God and humans, right? So for the past 1400 years, every single of the ulama, the religious scholars, native speaking Arab speakers, they interpreted this verse to mean, if you look at, don't forget the hadith, look at the tafsir, to be hitting your wife, and also the one about sex slavery to mean, for that to mean, there was no other interpretation. There was basically no other interpretation. All of these new Quranist interpretations are all modern. They were non-existent for 1400 years, and they only are modern interpretations, which suggests that because modern society has a higher standards, we have these new interpretations, right? So for you to suggest that that means something else, even if you're right, it means that Allah is retarded. It means that Allah came up with a way to send a message to Muslims, that Muslims who are native Arab speakers, who their entire job was to study Quran and interpret it, and did nothing else but that, they got it wrong for 1400 years. And only some Muslims, which are a small minority of Muslims, all of a sudden got it right after 1400 years. And it's only a coincidence that they got it right after the rest of the world decided that, oh yeah, maybe wife beating is not a right thing to do. It was only after that all of a sudden the Muslims all over, like a few minority Muslims realized, like, oh, we figured out the right interpretations that all Muslims have gotten wrong for 1400 years. So it makes no sense, basically. Does that? And by the way, and also reforming Islam is not a proper strategy as a whole. I think the people trying to reform Islam is a sign of a good thing. It means that Islam is losing relevance and people are desperate. So it's a sign of a good thing that is happening, but it itself is not the good thing that is happening, right? Because the thing that is causing more people desperately trying to reform Islam is Islam being challenged and Islam becoming more irrelevant. That desperation causes, so if you want to see more of that, then you should move to take a position against Islam rather than trying to reform Islam.
Okay, I have responses. Again, 30 seconds each, please. First from Sketch.
Yes, that even if you don't, okay, so you're going to forget about the Hadiths, but in the Quran, it references a whole bunch of events in the Torah and the Bible. And in the Quran itself says you have to refer to other books. It says you have to refer to the Bible. It says you have to refer to a Torah. Later, when it didn't work out, they started saying, oh, it got corrupted. But it still means you have to refer to it. You're just referring to a corrupted version. So trust me, bro, right? The Quran is basically a kit car. You need all these things on top of it to make it look like a Ferrari. But if you take all these parts off of it, it's just a Miata. It's just a Fiero. You understand what I'm saying? It's not a real religion. All right. It's copying off different things. So to gain legitimacy, that's what they did. It was a strategy. Islam is a strategy. It's not a religion.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the references to corruption in the Torah and the Bible, that's not about the book. That's about people misrepresenting the book, right? Is that what
Let me just.
My point is, you
quickly
need to
respond
reference
the-
it. You still reference.
No, okay, so that's a different thing because the references to the Bible and the Torah is to prove the legitimacy of the Quran based on referencing to that one, but it's not a reference for teaching. It's not like because it's corrupted, so it's not a reliable source of. And also, even if you did find the original Torah and the Bible, the Quran is a more complete version of Islam. So the original revelation that Moses and Jesus got, according to Islam, was like an incomplete version of Islam. So you don't need to refer to them anymore. You need to only refer to the Quran for teaching and the Hadith for following the Sunnah of the Prophet, the traditions of the Prophet. But also, when it comes to you're saying Islam is not a religion. Islam is a religion. It's just it's a crappier, more dangerous religion. And also, I do believe that all religions evolve and copy and paste from whatever came before them. So this is not unique to Islam. The problem with Islam is that it's not just the problem with Islam that makes it a bigger problem, in my opinion, is that it's not just a religion. Islam is a world model, is a system for governing the entire planet. And that's what makes it a lot more dangerous. It's harder to contain it as a private practice because it's more political than other religions. It's here to dominate and rule the entire planet.
Okay, and one more response from Jim. Very fast.
Beautifully said, guys. Another thing that people get wrong about the Quran itself when they haven't looked at it and examined it themselves is the Quran is written from longest to shortest chapter. It's not written chronologically. And the different ethical teachings and contradictions shown in it, you could, as a casual look, go any way with it. But I see the Quran structure almost a form of taqiyya itself. Because if you read it front to back, you think, okay, the violence happens in the beginning, but then it's abrogated to the peaceful times at the end, when in reality it's the reverse. The Meccan chapters are in the rear of the book, and the Medina chapters that finalize Islam are at the very end, that actually talk about Muhammad's need for war raids and caravanning and bringing the whole world under Islam under the sword. So I just wanted to throw that in there as well.
So the Quran is not written from the shortest to the longest. It's canonized from the shortest to the longest, right? For example, in Islam, you do have the order of revelation of each verse. So people have the order of revelation is different from the order that you have it in the Quran. But the alleged Osmanic text, they claim that the Quran was canonized during Osman, the third caliph, but that's false. It was canonized later during the Umayyad dynasty. But the canonized version of Islam, they just ordered it from the shortest and to the longest. And so we have the Meccan verses and the Medinan verses, and the Meccan verses are seen more peaceful and less violent, and those are usually the shorter ones. Not always, but some more the shorter ones. So you do get the somewhat more peaceful versions at the beginning and the harsher ones at the end. Sorry, I'm saying it the other way around. The longest ones at the beginning and so let me actually redo that. So let me actually re-say all of that. The Quran is not written from the longest to the shortest or the shortest to the longest. It's actually a mix. The Quran is canonized from the longest chapters to the shortest chapters, except the Fatiha chapter. So the Fatiha chapter or the Surah Hamd, that's at the beginning. And if you exclude that, then it's from the longest to the shortest. But that's not the order in which it's written. That's the order in which it's canonized. And the actual order is not the order in which it's written, because nobody was writing it apparently, like according to the Islamic standards. It's the order of revelation. So the order of revelation, for example, Iqra bi'ismika allazi khalaq, that's the first verse, but that's not the shortest Quranic chapter. So if you actually go by the order of revelation, it doesn't go either from short to long or long to short. It is somewhat the Meccan verses, which are at the end of the Quran, are so the Meccan verses are some on average shorter than the Medina short verses. So the order of the Quran is a little bit like the opposite of the revelation, but it doesn't match it perfectly, right? So the shortest surah is not the first surah, but it is at the closer to the end of the Quran. Does that make sense? Sorry, I got it mixed up at the beginning.
Yeah, no problem. I appreciate you guys daring that down. I actually got that wrong under pressure, so I appreciate the clarity.
Yeah, no worries.
where
So the biggest chapter is the chapter of the cow, the Baqarah chapter, and that's the second chapter of the Quran.
Yeah.
past the hour. If you have a little bit more time, we can get to Shauna or maybe Kat, or do you have to go?
Okay, let's do Shauna really fast, and then I go. Just one last thing. One last thing one last thing about the Quran. The Quran, unlike what Muslims will tell you, were different books that were evolving independently from each other, and then they merged together and they made it so that they don't have too much contradictions. And these were separate books that were named after things in nature, like spider or the cow or woman, which is also like something like that. By the way, having having a chapter, having a book named after the cow and a book named after a woman also shows the position of women in society.